For many chess players, their two favorite things are a good cup of coffee and the Italian game. And today I'll condense 300 years of chess opening theory into one quick crash course for you. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and let's rock and roll. In this position, Black has two main options to choose from, either to develop a knight or a bishop. An advantage of the classical Italian game with the bishop development is that you also prevent this move knight to g5, which can potentially attack your f7 square and can be uncomfortable. Now, ironically, in almost 2 million games, White still play that move, but in this case it is a blunder. There is no knight on f6, and therefore this diagonal is free for your queen to go and just grab that knight for nothing. Therefore, that is certainly not an option. Fundamentally, White has a choice between two different paths here. First, they can just complete their development, kind of playing something like knight c3, pawn d3, castle in whatever order. That is one way to go. The other direction is the most principled and the most aggressive way to strike in the center right away and try to seize the initiative. Let's start from simple development, where White develops a knight or maybe castles kingside. In this case, you develop this kingside knight, and it's a really useful move. You attack the central pawn on e4, you develop a piece, and you're getting ready to castle. A lot of good things within just one move. Then your opponents will typically play, let's say, something like d3 to solidify this pawn, and then you go d6. Now, in such positions, very often your opponent at some point will play pawn to h3 to stop your bishop from coming out and pinning the knight, and that is okay. I recommend that you do the same, and notice that unlike your opponent, you are delaying your castling, and there is a reason. After your opponent plays whatever move, here you can choose a classical route where you just develop, you castle, you go bishop e6, and you end up with an absolutely normal equal position that is definitely playable. But there is also another approach, which I love even more, is when you go hard with your kingside attack and you play pawn to g5. And the exclamation mark here is not for the objective strength of the move, but because it's a lot of fun. You're going to confuse everyone, sometimes including yourself. Bonk. You're going to play g4, open up the g-file, and checkmate White. Your plan is very straightforward, but it's very hard for White to stop it. For example, an attempt to play knight to h2 and to control this square actually fails because you can sacrifice a pawn and push forward with your plan anyways. Here, after White accepts the pawn, then you move the rook to the g-file, hitting this pawn, but of course, in the long run, we're going to aim towards the white king. And now there is no way for White to defend this pawn. They cannot play f3 because the pawn is pinned by our Italian bishop on c5, which is very handy in this case. Therefore, this pawn cannot be defended. We're attacking it 3 times, and White has no way to defend it. And after White plays something, let's say they grab this pawn, you capture on g4, putting some pressure, also opening up this diagonal for your queen, which is also really cool for your attack. Another nice benefit of pushing the pawn to g4 is that after an exchange, you often can develop your bishop with a tempo. You just recapture on g4 and simultaneously develop your bishop. In this case, we're also hitting the queen. And if there were the knight on f3, we would pin that, which is also nice. Right now, the queen is attacked. White has to do something about that. White still cannot push the pawn because of the same reason. It is pinned. And if the queen moves, we can now make use of our open g-file. You've got a really juicy move, bishop to f3, taking advantage of the pin, and also attacking this pawn on g2, and even if White tries pushing it forward, we're grabbing the pawn once again, and that is a fantastic solution. Of course, your opponent probably will be concerned with your Pinterest, but there's nothing he can do. The king is in check, it has to move, and on the next move, it leads to a checkmate. If your opponent chooses the most aggressive and the most principled way, then you should also develop quickly and counterattack. Your opponent will still play d4 trying to seize the initiative, and after an exchange, your bishop is attacked, it is very important to come forward with a check. Otherwise, retreating the bishop somewhere back is basically a losing error. Your opponent will keep pushing these pawns forward, chasing away these knights, keep attacking, and you're in trouble. We definitely do not want that. You're coming forward with a check. And in this position, your opponent can either use the bishop to counter, not like that, or the knight. We'll talk about both ways, starting with a bishop move. In this case, we trade. And for now, things look pretty good for White. White managed to obtain this nice pawn center, and therefore you're going to hit right where it hurts, right in the evaluation bar. You go d5 and destroy this nice pawn center right away. After an exchange, you've got a nice game, you're ready to castle, and life's good. If white wants to put you in trouble, he may still try queen to b3, which directly attacks your knight on d5, but also x-rays this pawn which stands behind, and for that reason your knight cannot retreat. But you've got a better thing to do. You can go knight to a5 with a counterattack and a double attack of his queen and bishop. It may seem like white can also counterattack, but your knight simply retreats back, and if white repeats the operation, no problem, you can do the same. Your knight is a forkaholic, there's no problem for you to just keep dancing around, and at some point your opponent will have to either accept a draw by repetition, which isn't good for you since you're playing black, or white will castle, you will do the same, and now your position is totally safe. You will probably develop your bishop. Maybe you will move the knight here to b6 with a double attack to the queen and bishop. White has this permanent weakness on d4, and in the long run, it will become a problem, and therefore, life's good. Before we move on to the main line, let me quickly remind you that it is the final chance to make use of my birthday specials. You can get my premium courses and bundles at a massive discount, and I'll be happy to help you get to the next level in chess. The link is right below. If you're interested, check this out. The main move, and also the trickiest, is for white to cover with a knight. However, since the knight is still pinned, you can seize the opportunity to grab the central pawn on e4 right now. Even though it looks like the knight guards this pawn, but not really, because it is pinned down to the king, therefore the knight cannot move. It is actually the opposite. Your knight from the middle attacks this knight on c3. But the Italian game is very aggressive for both sides, and white also cannot waste time defending this knight on c3. If white wastes time, you're going to simply castle and end up with an extra pawn. White wants to attack, and that is why they want to just keep attacking. They're willing to give up some material, and now they castle, letting you capture this knight on c3 and winning a pawn. And at this point, you need to make the right choice, whether to take with a knight or with a bishop. The very classical Italian game trap is knight takes c3. Looks tempting, and that is what most unprepared players play, but it is a mistake because after an exchange, instead of saving this rook, white plays a powerful move bishop to a3. Now your king is cut off, it can no longer castle, and white is going to attack it across the e-file, or maybe with a queen b3 move targeting the square on f7, and you are done. Definitely you don't want to go here. This means that black should make the right choice and to capture here with a bishop. And right now we're entering total madness, to be honest. Next moves are kind of crazy at first, but hopefully with a little bit of explanations, they make sense. So here's the deal. At first it seems that white should just recapture. But here's the problem for white. If they do that, you can play d5, and that move is just very strong. It's kind of a rule of thumb. If black manages to play d5 successfully, basically black takes over, because just look at this. If you play d5, you solidify your knight on e4, now it's rock solid, you kick out this bishop from c4, you also gain a tempo doing that, you open this diagonal for your bishop, you're just getting so many advantages with just one move, and you also shut down their attack. And this is what white certainly wants to avoid. Therefore, instead of taking on c3, they play d5 themselves. And they make use of the fact that you cannot save both of your hanging pieces at once. And they're trying to kind of disrupt your position and keep attacking. Now you go bishop f6, retreating the bishop from danger, and offering them to take on c6. You're okay with that because currently you're up a piece, and therefore you're just returning the piece back, and you're hoping to castle, which again white wants to avoid. That is why instead of taking the knight and letting you castle with some extra pawns, they go rook to e1. They're trying to put everything on fire, attacking both knights, also kind of hoping to get to your king, but of course, you're going to be cautious, you play knight to e7. This retreats this knight from danger and also covers up the king. Now rook takes e4, finally white regains their sacrificed piece, but you successfully castle. At this point, white needs to come up with something because you're up a pawn and you just want to play d6, and after that your position is completely solid and basically winning because white's attack is over, you're up material with a great position. Your kingside is very well defended. If necessary, you can always go with the knight to g6 and totally cover everything on the kingside, therefore there's nothing to worry about there. And for white to come up with any sort of attack, they gotta find the move pawn to d6. The idea here is not to attack your king, but just to shut down your queenside. Because with this queen on d6, it's getting harder for you to get this bishop out, to move the pawn, to bring your rook into play, and so your queenside is kind of stuck. But not if you know how to proceed, because you're going to play the paradoxical move. But before that, let me first show you what white is hoping for, alright? They're hoping for you to go here to hit the queen, the king retreats back and attacks the knight, you go d6 to open up the bishop and to defend the knight, they go with the knight to g5, piling up on this pawn on f7, but after some calculation, black thinks, wait a second, this knight is actually hanging. Black happily grabs the knight on g5, thinking they're winning, but then white plays queen to f7. This turns the table, and white wins the game. Instead of defending, we're going to take over the initiative with the move b5. You're giving up your extra pawn in order to develop your bishop with a tempo, hitting the rook and also this knight that stands behind. And if you can successfully do that, if you can successfully trade on f3, that will force white to recapture and totally expose their king. White's final try to be aggressive would be rook to g4, putting the rook opposite your king, maybe hoping for queen takes f6, but we can just kick this rook out, and either the rook has to just go somewhere to the queen side, and then you can take on f3 with a great game, or if white insists on being aggressive, then it's a what the fork moment for white. That was the main line. Congratulations, you did it. But nevertheless, there is one more line that you gotta be aware of. In this position, instead of recapturing, there is also this move e5. Very tricky and very dangerous. Because if you're not prepared, typically people just move this knight away, but then white captures on d4, hits the bishop. Those pawns are very strong. They keep moving forward, you keep wasting time retreating your pieces, and white is just winning. They've got a crushing attack. Therefore, if white goes pawn to e5, it's very important to know that the only correct response for black is this counterintuitive counter strike in the center with pawn to d5. If you remember, we talked about this move before. It just gives you a lot of advantages. It counterattacks white, it opens up this diagonal for the bishop, it potentially gives you this nice square for your knight, a lot of great things. Now, of course, at first, this line looks very complicated, but don't worry, I'll show you how to play here. After pawn takes g7, hitting your rook, and your rook comes away, at first it looks scary, like your kingside is destroyed, your king is exposed, what are you even doing? But here's the thing, this look is actually quite deceptive. In reality, you're taking over. Your rook is going to capture this pawn on g7, and then you'll be the one attacking on the kingside. Now, your king seems exposed, but if there is any check across the e-file, you can always use your bishop to cover. And as for your king, you're simply going to castle queenside with a great position. Moreover, just look at this, white is perfectly passive. They've got no active pieces at all, and therefore it is hard to expect that white has any attacking chances here. If white tries to hold on to this pawn on g7, they're gonna play bishop h6, trying to save it, but you can move the queen out, and you are going to play this move anyway because you're going to prepare castling queenside, and now you're hitting this bishop. If bishop comes back, the pawn will fall. If white tries to defend the bishop, no worries, we stick to our plan, develop a bishop, hit the knight, getting ready to castle. Now the knight is attacked, let's say white tries to trade, you could recapture, but you don't even need to, you can just complete your development, and just look at this, you're already winning, you've got so many attackers right here, and this whole construction for white is very shaky. White is going to lose all this material very quickly. If he tries bishop g5, the final attempt to counterattack, you can do the same, counterattack with this check, and then you suddenly sacrifice your queen and gain a winning attack. For example, in this tricky line, you're winning. Instead of capturing everything he can, white can simply retreat the bishop, but then your knight has a very comfy square to go to, the square e4, supported by the pawn. This knight is rock solid. Also now the center is locked and your king is perfectly safe. If white captures, most players go bishop b4 with a check, and it is an okay move to play, but even better is to slide back, because from here you keep putting this pressure to the central pawn, which is actually quite annoying for white, and on the next move you'll probably castle, then develop your knight to g4, pinning this knight, and also reinforcing the threat to the central pawn. If they trade on c6, good for you, now your center is even stronger. They never want to trade on e4, because your pawn will hit this knight on f3, that's not good for them. If instead they just try to develop and solidify the position, there is another common move, pawn to f6, to undermine the center and also getting your heavy pieces into play. If white captures here, you recapture with the queen with a lot of pressure to this knight on f3. In fact, you're just winning there. The most played move by white is pawn to h3, which seemed to make sense. White is trying to get rid of this bishop, but in fact it is a blunder. After the trade, you've got this sudden discovered attack, but we shouldn't judge white too harshly, because even Magnus Carlsen was once Magnus Blunderson. Now the queen needs to go. It also needs to guard this pawn on d4, and basically you're winning. I'll show you one game just because it's a lot of fun, and of course you don't need to remember it. So here black played queen h4, a pretty cool move, bringing the queen into action, and after white captured, they probably expected this trade, but black took on f2, making use of this x-ray. Pretty nice. And after the exchange, also probably white expected black to just take this rook on f2, but black once again played a stronger move, rook to f8. Since the rook is pinned and cannot run away, black wants to recapture with a rook, and he did that on the next turn, but now we also have this really active rook into play. White played queen e1 for whatever reason, queen g3, threatens checkmate in 1. After queen captures, white was forced to go rook queen to g1, but now rook takes b2, opens up this discovered attack. The queen needs to move, plus it also needs to keep guarding the square g2. White played queen to f1, but now black can reset the position, rook to f2, which is actually the coolest chess tactics, the windmill. We just repeat the position, the queen is hit once again by the sniper bishop, has to go back, rook to f2, pushes the queen back, and after queen takes c3, white's position was literally raised. If you want to know the 7 key lessons I've learned from 32 years of playing chess, you can check them out right here. And if you want to use the final opportunity to make use of my birthday specials, the link will be somewhere on the screen or down below in the description. Have a great day and take care.